Good morning, Shubhodaya, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to everyone to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. We have Swamiji, Swami Brahmavidananda ji from Mumbai, and he will be continuing his elucidation, his enunciation of the message of the Upanishads. Yesterday, he shed light on very important concepts of Pramanatva of Upanishad, how to approach Shastra, and how our understanding of what is the role of a Shastra is very different from the notion of faith and belief and etc. And he also gave a very fascinating, very enlightening explanation of the six different types of pramanas. So let us now start. Let I request Swamiji to start his session and share his knowledge with us more about the Upanishad.
Om Sadashivasamaramabham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Thank you, Nitin. Nice to be here with all of you all. Yesterday we had seen by the simple Drigdrishya Viveka, seer seen logic, that I am nothing but consciousness. Yeah. Now, if you were to ask Ishvara, who are you? We saw what is Ishvara also, the intelligence and the material for the whole creation. Only then the idea of omnipotence, omnipresence, etc., can be taken care of. That he is everywhere, etc., can be explained only if he is both the intelligence and the material for the creation. And if you were to ask Ishvara, who are you? What will he say? He'll come back to the same thing. I am the consciousness that makes up everything. So, are you really saying there is only one consciousness behind me and Ishvara? Yeah. That consciousness is one. Now, that is a premise that we are starting with. That is what the meaning, the nutshell meaning of the Dvaita Academy logo, Tattvamasi, is about. Okay. And to really understand that, I have to understand that the I which is aware of this body, the I which is aware of my prana, the I which is aware of my mind, emotions, etc., the I that is aware of my thinking and logic and reasoning, the I that is aware of my memories, that I, the consciousness, is limitless. That is what we are going to see today. Okay? That is what we are going to see today. Okay. So how do we see that? For anything to be limitless, it has to be free from the conditionings of time and space. Only then can a thing said as to be limitless. So to see the consciousness as limitless, let us see if it is going to be conditioned by time. Okay. For that, we have to see what exactly is the truth of time. What is this thing that we are calling time? I'm going to borrow some arguments from science just so that it is easier to communicate with the modern man, with the modern person. It's easier to communicate because some scientific ideas are already there. This can be done without that also. And they are not only scientific arguments. They are arguments which are the seeds for which are there in the Shastra as well. Okay. Now, what is time? Okay. I mean it philosophically, not with Bombay English. I was walking with this American friend of mine in Bombay. He wanted to see the area of Colaba, which is very different from the rest of Bombay. So I was taking him around. Someone walked up to me and said, "What is time?" And I said, 4:30 in the evening. And he went away. And the American turned around and said, "Wow, you Indians are very philosophical. A man on the street came and asked you, what is time? And you replied in Hindi. And he was satisfied and he went away." I said, "This is not philosophical. This is our Indian English. What is time?" You won't say, "What is the time? What is time?" I don't mean it in that context, in that way. I mean philosophically. What is this thing that we call time? Now, if you're looking at it from the standpoint of some arguments of science, time is the gap between two events. Simple definition, a fundamental definition, but which holds through right from the dawn of civilization to now. Gap between two events. So when we are an agrarian society, we did not require precise measurements of time. So we said sunrise and sunset, two events, the gap between them is time. Between sunrise and sunset, we will call it day. Between sunset and sunrise, we will call it night. Simple. But even in those days, we needed some division, because morning means when? Morning means when? So we divided the day into 4 yamas, 3 hours each. Night also into 4 yamas. So it's easier. And then I meet you when? Oh, first yama. Just after the puja, we will meet you. Okay. Then when he needed more precise times for our astrological calculation, etc., we brought in the idea of muhurta. Muhurta is very close to an hour. Okay? Some 58 minutes or something it comes to. And gatikas, etc. And in the Western world, you had hours and minutes, etc. 24-hour day. Remember, that division is up to us. Two events were more or less fixed, sunrise, sunset. Further divisions are up to us. So your watch, this watch runs on a 24-hour cycle, isn't it? Why not make it decimal system? 10 hours night, 10 hours day with 100 minutes. You can, only you'll have to change your phase dial and everything all the time. But we can make it into a decimal system. It's up to us. But you needed more and more precise measurements. And you needed to correlate it with different areas, with different places. So when you're saying sunrise and sunset, where sunrise and sunset? That question came up. Obviously, sunrise and sunset in India and states don't match. The earth being round, it doesn't match. Therefore, you brought in an artificial international date line. There is no line like that, which curves in the north to avoid Alaska, etc., and curves in the south to avoid some islands. Artificial. Then since at that time when we made all these things, England ruled the waves, as you say. Greenwich Mean Time became the standard measurement. It still is the standard measurement for reference point. Human decisions. There is something called time. Nobody is denying that. Nobody is denying that. And the basic definition is gap between two events. But with scientific development, etc., we needed more precise measurements of time. So sunrise, sunset, and according to the movement of the earth and the sun, sunrise, sunset time also changes, which didn't matter in an agrarian society, but which matters when you're talking about scientific precision. Therefore, you shifted the event from sunrise to sunset, which for practical purposes still continues. You shifted to the two pulses of a quartz. The simple watches that you're wearing, Titan, costs $1,000. Simple. But it is based on quartz. There are so many thousand pulses in a second. So the gap between two events became the gap between two pulses of a quartz. Very interesting. From sunrise, sunset, we came to here. So that we could further divide it into seconds, nanoseconds, picoseconds, etc. Smaller and smaller units, especially when you're doing experiments in the quantum physics. In the quantum field, you need fine measurements of time. And the whole idea changed when you're measuring stellar distances, etc. Okay, the events will change. But the gap between two events remains constant. Whether it was sunrise or sunset, the movement of the stars, or a quartz, two pulses of a quartz. The gap between two pulses of a quartz is what we call 1 unit of time. Very interesting. Now look at it. Even according to science and any philosophy also, not only Vedanta, there is no event without an observer. There is no event without an observer. That's why the big philosophical discussion you'll find in academic circles. Okay, if a tree falls in the forest and there is nobody to see the tree falling, has the tree really fallen? You can think about it. Okay, it's a purely academic exercise. I'm concerned with more the practical aspects of the whole thing, the reality aspect of the whole thing. Now look at this. Two pulses of a quartz, and no event is there if there is no observer of that event. So one pulse, one observation, one pulse, another, second pulse, another observation. Sunrise, one observation, sunset, one observation. So the gap between two pulses, this measurement of time, became the gap between two observations. Because without an observation, there is no event. Therefore, the gap between two observations is nothing but a gap between two thoughts. So what we call time is the gap between two thoughts. And what is there between two thoughts? You can't say nothing. I am there, observing the first thought, second thought. I am the content of that observer, the pure consciousness. Therefore, when I look at myself through these thoughts, I get an illusion called time. I get an apparent entity called time. Just an apparent thing. That's why you dismiss the thoughts, there is no time. There is no experience of time at all. As in deep sleep, as in samadhi. Where is time? Therefore, time affects the body, all right. Nothing more. Maybe to an extent your prana. It can't affect your mind. Your mind doesn't grow old. Your brain grows old because that is part of the body. Your mind does not grow old. There's nothing like old mind. There can be a mature mind or an immature mind. There's no old mind. Therefore, time does not affect your mind itself. How can it affect I consciousness? It's nothing but a gap between two thoughts. So actually speaking, you're looking at two thoughts and saying there is time. And I, the observer, is unaffected by it. Therefore, I, the consciousness, cannot be affected by the idea of time. That means I don't suffer the limitations of time. That means I am eternal, timelessness. I'm not saying I'm hanging around for a long time. No. Time is there, I am there. Dismiss time as in deep sleep or samadhi. I'm still there. I am not conditioned by time. I'm timeless. That means what? I'm birthless. I'm deathless. Body is born, body will die. Has to. However much you keep fit, etc., do kaya kalpa treatment, etc., the kaya body will go, the kalpa will remain. That's what will happen. Therefore, body is born, body will die. I, the consciousness, timeless, never born, never dying. And what about space? Anything that's unconditioned by time, really speaking, is unconditioned by space as well. But to understand that better, let us have a little look at what is the truth of space itself. I can do it the same way. What is the unit of space? Space is a measure of distance, isn't it? The gap between two objects. Again, it's the same thing. But it's external. Yeah, at least it is external. You mean to say space is not internal? There's no room in the space? Many of you must have already started feeling the room in your space, in your stomach, the space in your stomach, and feeling hungry. I only had coffee here. There was no time for breakfast. There's space. And if you can't get that, there is a lot more space here than necessary. Okay. Now look at it. So what is the unit of space? 1 mile? 1 kilometer? But by kilometer is 1000 meters? 1 meter? 100 centimeters? 1 centimeter? 10 millimeters? It goes on. Until you subdivide, what is there? Only the one who's dividing is there. The length vanishes. Therefore, I am the truth of space itself. Looks external. Looks external? Yeah, looks external. Why? How do you recognize space? How do you see space? Tell me that. Think about it. How do you see space? How do you see space? With what sense organ do you objectify space? Can you say your eyes? Yeah, I see space. See, all around there is space. Do you see space? You know a simple thing. For the eyes to see something, light should be reflected by space. By the object, light should be reflected into your eyes. Only then you will see an object. Therefore, if you are telling me that you are seeing space with your eyes, are you saying that space is reflecting light into your eyes? If space were to reflect light, you will not see anything. Why? From the light source, the light emerged and space reflected it back. There will be only one darkness. Space allows everything to pass through it. Light, energy, everything. Avakasha pradatru akashaha. Akasha is that which accommodates everything, does not reflect any light, etc. This being so, since it reflects everything, since it does not reflect light, how do you see space, sir? My question is still valid. How do you see space? You'll be constrained to say this, that I see space without the necessity of a sense organ. Even the blind, people born blind, are also aware of space. I know this blind physiotherapist. He stays at Vikhroli. He travels all over Bombay treating people. He couldn't do that unless he was aware of space. They don't see. Yeah, it's true. I don't have the vision. But I know space all right. I know space all right. Therefore, there is no way that you need a sense organ. There's no way you need a sense organ to see space. You see space without a sense organ, exactly like how you see your thoughts, how you see your emotions. All these are seen by you without the necessity of sense organs. They are all Sakshi Vetyam. There's a term used in Vedanta. They are known to you, the Sakshi, the witness, the knower, without the necessity of a sense organ. Without the necessity of a sense organ. That means what? It is seen here, looks out there. So you, the consciousness, is unconditioned by time, is unconditioned by space as well. That means what? You are limitlessness itself. You are that limitless consciousness. That's fine. I am limitless consciousness, all right. But there is one I here, there's one you there, and there are other things which don't have life. What about all these objects in the world? What will you talk about them, all these objects? What about them? What about all the objects? They are different from consciousness. This book is inert. This book is inert matter. It is different from consciousness. That's why I can read it. Book doesn't read me. What about that? Now, so let us look at, okay, all these arguments are given. The seed of it is all there in the Upanishads. I only developed it into a contemporary style. I have not invented any argument. Okay, it's all there. Chandogya. Look into Chandogya. You'll get it. Okay. Now this book. What is the truth of this book? You have to see that. this book is nothing but paper. In this form, the paper is called a book. In this form, the paper it will be called a newspaper. Because it is bound together, it's a book. If it was just a sheaf of papers clipped together, it'll be a file. So paper in this form is called a book. So the truth of the book is paper. The truth of the book is paper. Okay, fine, paper. So is the paper the absolute reality? Nah. This paper was once upon a time a tree that was chopped up and made into wood pulp, and from there you made this paper. Therefore, what is the truth of the paper? Wood pulp. Is wood pulp the final reality? No. What is the content? You give me any name and form, I'll reduce it to its content. It's a simple process. From book into paper, paper into wood pulp. Wood pulp will be reduced into what? Hydrocarbons. It's an arrangement. One arrangement of hydrocarbons, you will call it wood. Another arrangement of hydrocarbons, you will call it this body. Both are nothing but hydrocarbons. Anything in this world, we are living basically in a hydrocarbon-based world. So, hydrocarbons. Book number. Hydrocarbons. But a hydrocarbon itself is a molecule. It is an arrangement of atoms. Therefore, look at it now. The book form disappeared into its content paper. Paper form disappeared into its content wood pulp. Wood pulp form disappeared into its content hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbon, a form, an arrangement of molecules, disappears into its content, the atoms. Atom itself is an arrangement of subatomic particles, disappears into its content, the particles. 132 particles, I think, at the last count, including the Gibson's one, the God particle. And I was speaking to one of the scientists involved in the program. I said, what will you do if you find that God particle? Dobbs Gibson. Oh, the lot of questions will arise. More research will happen. What if you don't find it? Even then, more research will happen. Which means what? Any form can be reduced into its content, into its content, into its content. It will go on. What will be the final thing? Don't say nothing. Why? I started with this book. I'll give you a whack with it. Then you will know how real it is or unreal it is. Okay? The book is there. We are discussing this book. The final form has to be something which exists, but without any form. When I say without form, don't think of an amoeba. Amoeba is shapeless, not formless. It has got a form. Formless means boundaryless. Therefore, formless existence is limitless existence. This is the meaning behind the word Anoho Aniyan from the Upanishad. Smaller than the smallest, you go on drinking, go on, go on, go on. Finally, what? Form disappears. What is there? Limitless existence. Mahato Mahiyan. Anoho Aniyan. Mahato Mahiyan. That formless existence, limitless existence is the truth behind this book, is the truth behind this body, is the truth behind anything, is the truth behind anything, is the truth behind this whole universe, because what you call this universe is nothing but forms and names. This is what the Chandogya says. Sadeva Saumya Damagram Asit Ekameva Adutiyam Brahman. Before all these names and forms came into existence, what is there is only one existence called Brahman. From that, all these names and forms manifested. So Brahman is Ishvara. All these names and forms exist. Now we are in a very peculiar situation. What is that? There is one consciousness which is limitless and one existence which is limitless. Can there really be two limitless things? No. Therefore, we are constrained to say what exists, what we call existence, is nothing but consciousness. What we call consciousness is nothing but existence. Sattaya hi chit, chittaya hi sat. What is sat is chit, what is chit is sat, and they are both anantam. Therefore, satyam jnanam anantam. This is the reality of what? You, I. This is the reality. There's only one consciousness. That consciousness, from looking at names and forms, you call it existence. But it's the same entity. What exists is consciousness. What you call existence is nothing but consciousness. What you say consciousness is the existence, the reality behind the whole thing. This is the fundamental message of the Upanishad, that there's only one consciousness existence, which is me, I. Here, you should have a reasonable doubt. Swamiji, I can understand I am consciousness. But this book doesn't have life. It's inert. I can do what I want with it. You try to cut me, I will scream. Book doesn't scream when I tear pages out of it. Book doesn't scream. So here we say that existence, consciousness, though it is everywhere, certain things will manifest only existence. They will call it inert. Certain things like this body will manifest consciousness as well. Will manifest consciousness as well. Why? Because the manifesting medium, that depends on the form. Like silica is sand. Sand is nothing but silica. But silica in the form of the sand cannot reflect my face. But the same silica in the form of a mirror, glass, can reflect my face. What is the difference between silica, sand, and silica, glass? Nothing except the arrangement of the molecules. It's only form difference. Content is same silica only. So similarly, some forms can manifest consciousness. Some forms will manifest only existence. So that will take care of the living and the dead. This body is alive because a form which can manifest consciousness is available in this body. We call it the Sukshma Sharira, or the mind and reasoning, mind and intellect. Your prana, mind and intellect is the Sukshma Sharira. Now in the prana, in the mind and intellect, consciousness is manifest. And that is associated with this body. Therefore, body is alive. When that mind intellect leaves the body does not manifest consciousness again. Therefore, we call it dead. But the consciousness is always there. As existence, consciousness, it's always there. No difference. It's always there. Unlimited. But if I'm really unlimited, like space is limitless, it is in and through all the objects. How can I not go in through all the objects? That's because you're thinking of yourself still as a body. I'm talking about I, the consciousness, not I, the body. This body is limited by this form. Both the forms have the same degree of reality. Therefore, if this is harder, the bottle will break. Bottle is harder, my hand will be injured. Yeah. Same degree. Same degree. But that means, Swamiji, your consciousness seems to be at another degree of reality altogether. Yes, that's exactly what I want to tell you. This consciousness existence, we call it as absolute reality. What about other things? Let us examine the reality of this world. Okay, let's examine. In English and most of our regional languages, we'll have a few words to describe reality. They're ontological terms. Okay, they are terms dealing with how real it is. Like, for example, you will say the rope is real. The snake that I imagined on it is unreal. So you have a few words like that. Okay. Real, unreal, false. Okay. Simple words. The sand is real, the mirage is false. So how do you decide what is real and what is false? How do you decide that? Or you'll also say it is non-existent. It is not there. My head is there, but the horn on my head, like a unicorn's horn, not there. Or a rhinoceros horn, not there. So, existing, non-existing, and false. Rope, snake, mirage, water, etc. We have a few words like this. So, my question is, how do you say the rope is real and the snake is false, because both is your perception? And Swamiji, because the snake can be negated, you know. When I put the torch and see it properly, the snake is negated, but the rope continues. Aha, okay, all right. Therefore, from your example, let me evolve a definition for real. Abhaditam satyam. That which cannot be negated is real. It's an Upanishad definition actually, but let's see. Abhaditam satyam. That which cannot be negated is real. Now, by using this definition, the I, the consciousness, is not affected by this definition. Why? It can never be negated. Why? It's timeless, spaceless. It's free from the limitations of time and space. You cannot negate it. The false will remain false, not a problem. The non-existence does not have a problem, is non-existence anyway. Non-existence will not have a problem. False entities like rope, snake will not have a problem. But the problem will remain for this bottle. Okay? Problem will remain for this bottle. Can you say this is abhaditam satyam? If I crush it, gone, bottle gone. I don't even have to crush it. I will say this is nothing but glass. Where is the bottle? There's nothing but glass. Bottle negated, when I shifted my attention to glass. Book negated when I shift my attention to paper. Table negated when I shift my attention to wood. I don't have to destroy the table. I don't have to use a karate chop and break it up. Not necessary. In my understanding, it starts negated. So you see now how interesting it becomes. What you have taken as real before, the real bottle, Sun Gataha Avat, the real book, real, that meaning has gone now to the consciousness. Abhaditam, that which cannot be negated. False remains as false, non-existence remains as non-existence. What about the things that you took as real? This bottle is not false like the rope snake. Got a functional validity. It can hold water. It can hold water. It's got a functional reality. Your rope snake did not have that. But like how the rope snake disappeared, this, I'm holding the bottle in my hand and it has disappeared because there's nothing but glass. When I shift my attention, this is negated. Bottle is negated. There's only glass. The gold chain that you're wearing, where is the chain? There's nothing but gold. If you have any doubts about that, leave the gold with me and take away your chain. This is called experiential learning. You do it once in your lifetime, you'll never have a doubt after that. My gold chain gone. It was 30 grams. 1 lakh rupees gone. Then you'll understand it very well. Okay. It's called experiential learning. But you don't need that. We are smart people. We can understand without that experience. Thank God. So, now what do you call this? What do you call this? You can't say it's unreal. You can't say it's false. You can't say it's real either because abhaditam satyam, the definition doesn't fit in. Therefore, the Shastra provides a name for it by saying this is mithya. Mithya is not illusion. Mithya is not delusion. Okay? Mithya is that which cannot be talked about as real or unreal. Sat asadbhyam anirvachaniyam. Don't say mithya is indescribable. That's not the right word. It is sat asadbhyam anirvachaniyam. It cannot be categorized as real or not real. It seems to have an in-between existence. It exists depending upon something else. The bottle exists depending upon glass. The book exists depending upon paper. The table exists depending upon wood. All names and forms exist depending upon Sat, the consciousness. On existence consciousness, the whole world depends. Because you examine anything in the world, you will come back to pure existence. Any living thing will go back to consciousness. Therefore, existence consciousness is the reality behind the whole universe. Everything is a manifestation of that existence consciousness. And the whole universe is therefore talked about as mithya, a relative existence. Mithya means a dependent reality. It does not have independent reality. There is only one independent reality in the world, the consciousness, the Brahman that you are. Everything else is what? The illusion, the false, everything can be categorized as mithya. One global term. When you say world is mithya, this is what you mean. We don't mean world is an illusion. If you're saying world is an illusion, there's a big delusion that you have having. World dependent reality. It's a manifestation depending upon existence consciousness. It's a dependent reality, not an independent reality. The consciousness is independent reality, therefore called Satyam. All dependent realities are called Mithya. Why? You remove the Satyam, there is no Mithya left. From the Skurta, remove the cloth. What is left? Nothing. Nothing. There is no form itself. In fact, look at it. The color of the kurta is the color of the cloth. The feel, the texture of the kurta is the texture of the cloth. The fall of the kurta is the fall of the cloth. Where is kurta? A word given for a form. Vacharambanam vikaro namadeyam. The Chandogya says that. It is nothing but a name given to a form. The content is a reality, and the content is nothing but Sat existence consciousness. That existent consciousness is a reality. Everything else is just an appearance. The whole universe is an appearance. Therefore, is the kurta a problem for the cloth? Is the book a problem for paper? Is the bottle a problem for glass? Why is the world a problem for me? Ekatvam manupashyataha. One who sees the reality that there is nothing but pure consciousness existence. Is the whole world a problem? To draw from my Purvashram experiences. The wave in the ocean, huge waves. Okay, I've seen them all. 100-foot high waves. They'll pick up a 10,000-ton ship 20 feet in the air and drop it down. That powerful wave, huge, massive. If it hits a boat, it is swarmed. Finished. Is that huge wave that can sink a ship a problem for the water? The ship can say, the captain of the ship can say, there is problem with these waves. I have to navigate very carefully. I cannot let it hit my sides because I will topple. I have to face it head on. 10,000-ton ship, 10,000 horsepowers, okay? That type of a ship can be toppled by one wave. But is that wave heavy for the ocean, for the water? Remove the water, there is no wave except this wave. Hi. There's no wave. Therefore, the wave rests very lightly on water, isn't it? Water is not burdened by the weight of the wave. No issues. The world is too small to create a problem for me, existence consciousness. Nothing. Are you saying the world is not there? Of course not. Functionally valid. So to make this topic easier for people, since some of you are messaging that it's a difficult topic, important but difficult, yes, let us divide this world and the consciousness into three types of realities. One is the absolute reality, I, the consciousness, unshaken. Then there is another reality this is called Paramarthika Satyam, okay, absolute reality. Paramartha Satyam, absolute reality. Paramarthikam. Only one existence consciousness, nothing. Once you know that, you're free from everything, free from your problem of finitude, because it's you, not separate from you. Then what about my functioning, my body, etc.? These are called Vyavaharika Satyam, like this bottle of water. Vyavaharikam. It has got a functional reality. In between, as I was talking, somebody messaged, Swamiji, today is Ekadashi, when I was talking about breakfast. You know, somebody has messaged. Why? The character's mind is still stuck with the functional. I'm trying to make him understand the Paramarthikam. His mind is stuck on the functional. Functional reality. Because you do have it. Some are fasting today, some are feasting today. Why? Your choice. There is no must in these things. It's all open to human choice. But these are all functional realities. What is functional reality? Functional reality is what we call the universe, God created stuff. Functional. Then there is another brand of reality. Okay. Another this thing called Pratibhasikam. Purely subjective. Like the snake that you see on the rope. Everyone doesn't see a snake. You saw it. Your friend walking next to you, he saw the rope for what it is. You saw a snake. Pratibhasikam. Pratibhasikam. Purely subjective realities. Your dreams, Pratibhasikam. Your emotions, Pratibhasikam. Oh, I love this. You love it. Somebody else doesn't love it. Pratibhasikam. What you like, etc. is Pratibhasikam. Cultural conditionings, Pratibhasikam. It has got some Vyavahara this also. So sometimes Vyavahara and Pratibhasikam is mixed up. Generally mixed up. When you say experience, what do you mean? Samji, I went to the beach. What a beautiful experience it was. After so long, I'm going to the beach. So I say, what is beach? If you're looking at it as Vyavaharikam, there is water, there is sand, there is sunset, there are clouds, blue sky, and the breeze. I felt so happy. Subjective. Valid for you. Another person whom I know went on the same beach and he was unhappy. I said, hey, what happened to you? 1 year ago, my wife on the same beach told me she wants a divorce from me. So now I can't even see sand. When I see sand, I think of the wife I loved and the problems we are having. So he is sad, you are happy. Subjective. Pratibhasikam. That sadness is his, that happiness is yours. This is how the whole thing is. Pratibhasikam. So when tomorrow you say, it's my own experience, understand, in that your own experience, there is a Pratibhasika component. So when you say, it is my experiences like this, it may be valid for you. There is a subjectivity in it, understand that. Because what is experience? Nothing but an objective reality and your subjective response to it. If it is only objective reality, it will become pramana. Your perception based, it's all true. Perception, inference, etc. What we discussed yesterday, functionally valid. But when you say experience, there's an emotional component. There's a subjective component. Yeah, there's a subjective component. So you have to take the subjective component into account. When you say from my experience I'm talking, your experience has a subjective component. It may not be valid for everyone. Because too much is talked about this Anubhava. Anubhava is nothing but Jnanam. When you come to Vedanta, when you say Vedanta Anubhava, you are saying clear-cut recognition of the fact that you are the self. This consciousness, existence without any limits. Now I have some more time, so I can go into one more dimension of this. Okay, this topic is endless. There are various facets to it. Okay, but one more dimension I can go to. This limitlessness is also called Ananda. You hear the word Sachidananda, etc. The meaning of the word Anandam, really speaking, is Anantam. Excuse me, limitlessness. But it is called Anandam for a reason. Because isn't that what we are all searching for? A sense of fulfillment, a sense of joy and fulfillment in life. With respect to that, this is called Anandam. And we think Ananda is out there, that will make me happy, this will make me happy. Swamiji, I wish I could come to your ashram in Rishikesh. I've heard it's such a beautiful place. The mountains in the background, the Ganga flowing, and the sit out in the ashram where we can literally jump into the Ganga. What a beautiful place. Yes, one of the most beautiful places in the world. I traveled a bit. I think this is one of the most beautiful places. What Anandam. Anandam. For you, who is going a few days to stay there, it is Anandam. As a local there, every time I go to Rishikesh, I will meet a couple of local guys who will come up to me. महाराज जी, आप मुंबई से आए हैं ना? हाँ, हम बम्बई से आया हूँ. समझी, कुछ काम मिलेगा. Driving जानता हूँ. I know how to drive. Will I get a job in Bombay? And I always tell him this. अरे, what is there in Bombay? मायापुरी है, कुछ नहीं है. इधर हिमालय में है, गंगा की गोद में है, in the lap of the Ganga. Why do you want to leave this place? स्वामी जी, इधर क्या रखा है? पहाड़ है, पानी, और कुछ नहीं है. There is mountains, there is water, there is nothing else. For him, it is not a source of ananda. Why? No money. भूखा मरेगा मैं. The same place which is ananda for you and me is not ananda for him. To a smoker, that morning, Ekadashi or no Ekadashi, that cigarette he can have, okay? Cigarette is not food. Don't quote me, okay? Saying Swamiji said cigarette is okay. I'm joking about it. For that is a source of joy. For a non-smoker, I can't stand that smell. So there is no real object or place or thing or time. Happy hours. I'm a sadhu, I know. But I know about happy hours, okay? Happy hours are not really meant for you. They're making you drink 2 hours earlier, that's all. For them, it is happy hours. Why? They get additional income. Thank God, bars are not yet open. Some places they are, but most places they are not. So there is no time called happiness. There is no this thing. But you experience happiness. And to experience happiness, it is not that everything has to be fine in your life. Let me give you an example. Here is a person. Early morning, he's getting ready for work. His wife handles him a sheaf of papers. He says, what is this? Divorce papers. Don't create a fuss, please sign it. Can we discuss about it? There's nothing to discuss. At least let us wait until I come back from work in the evening. I will not be here. Completely blindsided. His personal life, which he thought was going great guns, is now finished. So upset and angry, confused because he doesn't know what went wrong. He drives to the office. And in that mood, he picks up a fight with his boss. And the boss says, well, if that's how you feel, please clear out your table right now. I'll give you 3 months compensation. According to your contract, leave. My God. Personal life gone, professional life also finished. angry and upset. He's driving, worried about all these things. What will I do? No wife, no job, nothing. Meets with an accident, wakes up in the hospital. Leg is broken, 2 ribs are fractured. Even breathing is uncomfortable. At this point, a friend visits him to cheer him up. What cheering up? What cheering up can you do? If he has lost his job, you can say at least your wife is there, you have this thing, you have a nice family, etc. You have good health, etc. You can pick up another job. You can say something. If the divorce is there, but job, etc. is there, you can say, okay, personal life is a, but you lucky, you have a good job, this, that, etc. You can tackle it. If both are gone, you can still say, hey, you're a healthy young man, intelligent, etc. You can rebuild your life again. Now he's landing in hospital. What is there to cheer him up about? What can you do? Therefore, like a typical man, he went and cracked a joke. And hearing this joke, this guy laughs, forgetting his ribs. Forgetting the ribs which have been fractured, he forgets that and he laughs. And then he holds on to his rib, but he's still laughing. From where did that ananda come? Not from outside. There's nothing outside to make him happy. Personal life, professional life, health, gone. It'll take a long time for him to get back on his feet. At least 6 weeks in plaster. But still, you laughed, you're happy for that few moments. Here it was a joke. Let me give you another example. I'm roaming aimlessly, going for a walk. And suddenly I see this kid there, playing in the dirt. But what a cherubic smile. What a beautiful. I am arrested by that kid. And I feel joy welling up in my heart. Or I'm returning home from the walk. The sun has already set. And through the 2 buildings in Bombay, I see the moon. Ah, full moon. Wow. I get an object that I desired. Wow, the happiness. Now look at it in all these cases. My mind was projecting into various things. When that mind is arrested by an experience, by a joke, by a sight or a sound, when that thing is arrested, your mind is arrested, the limitlessness that you are wells up in your mind, because mind is arrested now. There's no projections. Arrested. And it becomes joy or fulfillment. The Anantam manifests as Ananda. Therefore, Ananda is a Lakshana Vakya. It's an implied term, implying your limitlessness. Your limitlessness, when it comes up in your mind, experientially, because you don't know it yet. If you know it, you're always content, happy, cheerful. When it manifests like that, you experience joy and fullness. That's why even if you have a stiff upper lip, someone cracks a PJ, you will laugh. And he'll try to hide your laughter because you're supposed to be very dignified. Yeah. A child playing, you'll have a smile on your lips. The ananda that you experience is nothing but your limitlessness manifesting in your mind. Therefore, Ananda means nothing but Anantam. This Anantam is what you are. That's why in Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahman is defined as Satyam Jnanam Anantam. And then that same Anantam is presented as Anandam in the Bhrigu. Okay. So we have cut across a huge topic today, gone all the way from existence, consciousness. We have seen what is Satyam Mithya, we've seen what is Anandam. And with all this, how do you live in the world then? Now remember, I have this knowledge. Mahatma, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman Aham Asmi iti, Aham Brahmasmi iti. How do you live? An advice given. Murkhavat achare. Like the other fools in society, you also love. You can't take yourself too seriously. How can you take yourself too seriously? ये सत्यम ज्ञानम अनंतम ब्रह्म ना ठीक है. So everyone is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman. There's only one Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman in the world. So what are you feeling special about yourself? Huh? What is the big deal? What is the big deal about it? Joe, if you really understand, that knowledge will rest lightly on your shoulders. You can't take yourself too seriously. I am Maharaju, Mahatma. Okay, you are okay. You know the truth. Good. Achha. Very good. Yeah. So you will take it lightly. That's why in the Gita and other places also it's mentioned how a wise person lives with the sense of fulfillment, etc. It's expressed in a very beautiful story, Buddhist story. Okay. But Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism only anyway. Even though they have a socio-political identity which is separate, which is acceptable. So Buddha declared, the flowers are showered for Ananda. Ananda is his disciple. That's a Buddhistic expression showing that now Ananda is a wise person, he has understood the truth. So all the students are thrilled. One of us have managed to, they all run to Ananda. Ananda, now that you are a wise person, how do you find the world? He opens his eyes and looks around, as miserable as ever. And then he laughs. Meaning, world doesn't change. The world is the same. Coronavirus will still continue. Okay. Until you find a vaccine for it or you get immunity towards it. It will continue. But it is not enough to dismiss the Ananda that you are. Your relationship issues will continue. Okay. But you can happily tackle them. Food, clothing, shelter issues will be there. But previously, you tackled them with a paradigm of insufficiency. I'm an insufficient human being. I need all these things to become happy. Now you're tackling them with a sense of sufficiency. I'm a full, complete being. I'm Ananda. These are certain practical, vyavaharika things I have to deal with. I will deal with it. No big deal. You live a life of fulfillment. Now, if there are any questions, shoot. It's a good place for me to say that because I cut across huge topics today. Okay, huge topic. Normally, in a regular class, I would be doing this over a series of half a dozen classes. Yeah.
We already have 6 questions, Swamiji.
Shoot.
So we will take it one by one. Viewers, if you have any more questions, please put it in question and a box and not in chat box. I think the first question we have is from your yesterday's session.
Yeah.
In your yesterday's session, you indicated that awareness can manifest itself only in the uh, only in the min, which is being matter, is Maya. If so, it would mean awareness can manifest only in Maya. Then how is it possible to validate the permanent and eternal nature of awareness? How can we rule out that awareness is not a byproduct of Maya?
Okay, good question. Okay, simple. Let me cut a. How can awareness be said as not a byproduct of Maya? It's simple. Do I see Maya or Maya sees me? If I see Maya and mithya things, that means what? I am the independent observer. And what is observed? Therefore, Maya is not there without the consciousness of the observer. Simple. Therefore, I am independent of Maya. Maya is dependent on me. One line answer. Okay. Yeah. If he really thinks about all that I have said today, that question will not come up. Probably he raised this question early enough in the lecture. Yeah.
Yes, it was put in the beginning of the lecture itself.
Yeah, exactly. So after all this, I don't think that question will stand.
The second question is, does it mean that space and time are products of consciousness?
Yes, space and time are manifestations of consciousness. In the Shastra, we don't take space and time as different. We only mention one. Either space will be mentioned or time will be mentioned. Why? Because we knew time-space continuum is one. And thanks to Stephen Hawking, scientifically also it is proved that time-space continuum is one. Those who want to understand that scientifically, okay, those who want to understand in a simple manner, you cannot think of now without here or then without there. If you want, that's pure simple experiential. Now, if you want to understand it scientifically, read Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time. Even if you read the second chapter up to that much, unless you have a background in science, it's a difficult book to read. So, but that will explain it scientific, with a scientific paradigm. But yes, it's a manifestation. Space is the first manifestation of the consciousness in the physical realm. Yeah.
Viewers, again request you to put the questions in Q&A box and not in the chat box. Swamiji, the next question is, how do the 132 particles lead to limitlessness?
132 particle does not lead to limitlessness.
And how does it lead to limitlessness?
Yeah, it does not lead to limitlessness. I use that example to show that every particle can be reduced to something else, something else, something else. Right now, we have counted 132 particles. They're actually subatomic. They are particles of particles of particles of particles. And the final thing, if at all there is going to be a final thing, which is not going to be discovered by science, will have to be an existence without a form, because each particle is a form. So the final reality has to be existence without a form. That is understanding, that's cognitive, that is not experiential. Science cannot describe it because formless existence cannot be seen or recorded. But can be understood, like how you are understanding right now. Yeah.
Swamiji, the next question is, how do we interpret the Panchabhutas in terms of real and unreal? What is space in these terms?
What is the difference between space and Panchabhutas or space other than Panchabhutas? Space is space. Panchabhuta is one paradigm of creation. It's just a simple paradigm, a very elementary paradigm used to indicate that everything is manifest from consciousness. There's only one paradigm that the Veda uses. Waking, dream, and sleep, sleep is another paradigm that the same Veda Upanishads use to indicate that everything has come from one consciousness. Therefore, there are various paradigms like this. Panchabhuta is a popular paradigm, a paradigm to explain what? Not to show the reality of Panchabhutas. The Upanishads talk about creation not to show the reality of creation, but to show the reality of the consciousness and the mithyatvam of the creation. Therefore, to show everything has come from consciousness, you use a 5-element Panchabhuta model. That's all. So the Panchabhuta model is not different from the space you and I are talking about. It's the same space only. Yeah. It's only a model to explain creation, to show that creation is not really a creation. It is manifested from Brahman, is resolved into Brahman. Therefore, all that is there is Brahman existence consciousness. That's it.
The next question is, Swamiji, please explain consciousness and pure consciousness with the difference between the two.
Okay. The term consciousness and pure consciousness. Yeah. The word pure consciousness is used for consciousness simple. Okay. The other word consciousness, when you use in science, etc., is the consciousness that is manifest in your mind. Is your mind awareful or not awareful? Your mind is sentient. It's an awareful entity. That means what? Mind itself is nothing but matter. You have a subject-object relationship. If you're following the Panchabhuta model, it's a product of the subtle aspect, the sattvic aspect of the apanchikrita bhutas. Bhutas, before they were grossified, the sattvic aspect of it from the mind. Now, mind being matter, but mind is conscious. That means what? I, the consciousness, is reflected, manifested in the mind. That is what can be studied in science. That awarefulness that we have. And that mind functions through the brain. That mind functions through the brain. Therefore, you will study the question of consciousness with respect to the brain. To differentiate that from the consciousness we are talking about as Atma, we use the word pure consciousness. There is no impure consciousness, really speaking, okay? But this term is used just to differentiate. Objectless consciousness, non-conceptual consciousness. These are the terms used. That's all.
The next question is, what is Vedanta?
What is Vedanta? All that I talked about. Vedanta is a positional name given to the Upanishads. That which comes at the end of the Veda, the Anta Bhaga of the Veda, end portion of the Veda is called Upanishad. That name is important because when you go into technical arguments, whether the Upanishad is talking about a separate subject matter or the same subject matter as the Veda, etc., for that positional name is important to indicate its independence in terms of subject matter from the Veda. Dharmartha Kama on one side, Moksha on the other side, that Vedanta deals with. Therefore, Vedanta Nama Upanishad Pramanam. That's how I started the talk. Vedanta is a name given to the Upanishads and it's a means for knowing the truth.
Swamiji, some of the modern scholars, they say that Vedanta means, it is end of the Veda in the sense of a historical sense, that first the Vedas were written and then some higher philosophy in the form of Vedanta is written. So the Veda is primitive and the Vedanta is advanced. I mean, what is your view of this?
Yeah, that is all. When academicians get into traditional disciplines, they will talk about Veda being primitive and Vedanta being sophisticated, etc. Why do they do that? Because they're looking at it as a philosophy. And in philosophy, there is always an evolution of thought. Someone proposed a thesis. There is an antithesis. Someone challenged that. There is a synthesis of thought. Then a new thesis is propounded. There is an antithesis. There is synthesis. This goes on. This is how the history of philosophy is talked about. So if you're talking now, when the Westerners studied the Upanishads, etc., they looked upon it also as a philosophy. Because remember, there's a huge communication problem. See, to communicate Vedanta, you need a command over a language. And all of Vedanta was in Sanskrit. So the study into this thing and all started at Annie Besant's time. Okay, that's when it first started. more or less. So they had to catch hold of some Sanskrit Pandits who knew something. None of them traveled to the Himalayas where we were to study. Okay, that was beyond them. Coming to India itself was a big thing for them. Why mosquitoes, this, that, etc. Food. And going to the Himalayas, इनके बस के बात नहीं था. What you say in Hindi? It was not meant for them. Okay. So when these people came, they caught hold of some Pandits. Now the Pandit doesn't know English. The Pandit doesn't know English. And these characters didn't know Sanskrit. It's only later on, after Ballantyne, etc., that is about 100 years, maybe, max, that they started studying Sanskrit. And not that they had any great respect for Sanskrit, because they call Panini, etc., as native grammarians. The word native is used derogatory. Okay. Yeah, native grammarians. What native grammarians? They were the authority on Sanskrit grammar. Yeah. That's like using the word vernacular instead of the word original. Anyway, they studied this. So Pramanam. Pramanam, now how to explain Pramanam? I'm sure the scholars said Pramakarnam. But they, in their struggling to understand that authority, philosophy. So they studied Vedanta also as a philosophy. And then they tried to apply that Western model of evolution of philosophy, historical perspective of philosophy into Vedanta. Whereas if you look at the development of Indian philosophy, other darshanas, other schools, you will find the highest thought, Aham Brahmasmi, is said in the Upanishad that came first. And I am different from God, this, that, etc. came later. Therefore, the highest thought was simplified later on for people's understanding's sake. Each Acharya did that for whatever he thought was correct. Therefore, there is no evolution of thought there. Veda is a pramana. Now you have to look at, there is no external evidence to show either thing. Therefore, you have to look at internal evidence. Internal evidence in the Veda says the whole thing was revealed at one stroke. To different rishis, yes. It was revealed to different rishis. Every rishi did not get the whole thing. That was put together by Vyasa later on. But the whole thing was revealed at one stroke. Ishwarena Nishwasitam Vedaha. It is there. It is there. You have to look at internal evidence, because external evidence, where are you going to find it? Something at 10,000 years old, how are you going to find it? And a live culture where we are not moving away for us to have some monuments, etc., buried under the sand. You don't have that. We are living culture. Yeah. So it's a continuous culture. Therefore, applying those paradigms, they are talking about all this. That's not an appropriate approach to study the Veda or the Upanishads. The approach is wrong, you can't come to a right answer. It's like trying to study science from a religious standpoint. How will it work? How can you study science from a religious standpoint? You can't. Yeah. Same way here.
Swamiji, we have a question from yesterday's discussion. I think yesterday also this question was asked. What is Ishvara and Paramatma? What is the difference between the two terms?
There is no difference. Ishvara is Paramatma, Paramatma is Ishvara. Take it like that for the time being.
The next question is, can you please explain again about Ananda?
Ananda is nothing but your own true nature. Ananda is your true nature. Your limitlessness, when it expresses in the mind, is called Ananda. Look at it. Your mind is projecting into a desire. I want that, I want that, I want that. So that projecting mind denies the fact of yourself being Ananda. Then you got what you wanted. Mental clearance, projection gone because you got it. The infinite nature of yourself, the Anantam, limitlessness, manifests in your mind as an experience of Ananda, joy. Therefore, Ananda is nothing but your limitlessness manifest in your mind. Like your awarefulness is nothing but the consciousness manifest in your mind. Same way, the limitlessness manifest in your mind is called Ananda.
We have a related question to Ananda.
Hmm.
Does it mean that to experience Anandam, we need a trigger? For example, a small child or a sunset. How do we go beyond it?
You go beyond it in your understanding. That's a good thing. Experiential Ananda is temporary because experiential Ananda depends upon your mental clearance coming in. Either your sight that you see arrests your attention or a desire fulfillment, etc. You get a mental clearance and the Ananda that you are manifest. To go beyond that is to recognize that you are limitless consciousness. It takes some study, it takes some reflection, it will take some contemplation to own it up and make it yours. All that will take. Okay, that is not a weekend program. A weekend program is giving you insights, but you have to work on that insights and gain it. Like after this class, I have a class where I'm teaching people who have been attending the class for the last 12 years, one class a week. It takes time and some effort. If it's full time, of course, 3-4 years. Okay, yeah.
Swamiji, the next question is, what I am hearing is that I can change things around me because I am connected to everything. Please share about how to be of service to the world with this mindset.
Okay, you may have heard that I can change things because I am everything. No, I have not said it. You have heard it, okay, but I have not said it. Okay, you have heard something. This is called Ashruta Kalpanam. Okay, you're imagining something I have not said. Sorry, I have not said you can change everything. Yeah, certain things in the world you can change. Certain things in the world you cannot change. And it takes wisdom to know the difference.
The next question is,
Once again, hold on, just let me complete that.
oh,
Now,
okay.
to be of service to the world, you can be of service to the world with any knowledge. Without this Atma Jnanam, also you can be service of the world. There are so many people doing social work without Atma Jnanam. But without Atma Jnanam, it can be a little frustrating, because the people whom you work for to bring the change do not always appreciate it. They may not even want it. So it's very important to understand what people need identification, build up awareness, etc., before you try to bring in a change. Okay. And if you have this knowledge, you can happily go about bringing in all the changes. But the changes that you're trying to create will depend upon your area of expertise. It doesn't depend on Vedanta. It depends upon your area of expertise, what you can do, what is the need, your need identification, the society that you're functioning with. Yeah. And then bring about the change proactively. Certain things will work out, certain things will not work out. That also I'll guarantee. The same people whom you're trying to help may sometimes reject your help. Leave them be. Respect the autonomy of people and work. Then you'll be happy. You can happily go about doing it. Yeah, Nathan.
The next question is, difference between Sakshi and consciousness.
Okay. The consciousness gains the name Sakshi, the witness, with respect to the fact that it can be aware of everything. With respect to the fact, when you use the word Sakshi, it means witness. Witnessing what? Buddhi vritti naam Sakshi, you will use the term. The Sakshi to all your thoughts. Avasthatraya Sakshi, the witnesser of the three states of experience, waking, dream, and deep sleep. Why? Because I, the consciousness, aware of the whole thing. So it is a name given to the consciousness with respect to the fact it is aware of everything. It's just a name.
Uh, the next question is, how would a beginner know that he or she is going to the right guru? Many have been waylaid in cult types and spending time with the wrong people.
That is true. It's exactly like, how do you find the right doctor? Difficult. So one way of finding a right doctor is you look for his qualification. At least that is verifiable. With respect to gurus, Gurus rarely have a PhD. Okay, some gurus may have. I don't have a PhD. I'm not academic. Gurus may not even be educated. Ramana was not educated. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was not educated. Okay. That doesn't mean lack of education is a qualification for a guru. Okay. Then I wouldn't qualify because I have some basic education. Okay. In my Purvashrama, I have something to do with engineering. Okay. So now look at this. One thing to see is, does he have a parampara? Parampara is teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student. Is he teaching the Shastra? Is he making it knowledge oriented or experience oriented? If it is experience oriented, it may be a different field. Authentic but different field, not necessarily Vedanta. Vedanta is knowledge oriented. Is he teaching the Shastra or is he teaching only out of his experience? These are a few guidelines by which you will know the right teacher. Does he have a student who's validated what he said and he can also become a teacher? That is ultimate then. If he has a student who has become a teacher, you know, hey, this guy is good enough to create an ordinary person into a teacher, he must be a teacher. So these are some of the guidelines. It is Shankara in Viveka Chudamani says 3 things are very difficult. Manushyatvam, human birth. Mumukshutvam, the desire for moksha. Mahapurusha Samashraya. A Mahatma saying that he will teach you. Durlabham Trayame Vetat. These 3 things are very difficult to gain. Deva Anugraha Hetukam. By God's grace. Therefore, if you're really sincere, pray to the Lord that you will get a good teacher. And also pray to the Lord that when a good teacher comes, you'll be able to recognize that. More important than that is to discover the student in you. I knew my teacher much before I became a student. But the moment I discovered the student in me, I discovered the teacher in him. Exactly like Arjuna. Krishna was buddy. Krishna was brother-in-law. Krishna was comrade in arms. But the moment he discovered the problem and the student, he discovered the teacher in Krishna. The same buddy, the same friend, the same comrade, the same brother-in-law. He discovered the teacher as well. So work on Viveka, Vairagya, Shat Sampati, all these are the qualifications of the student. Work on that. Pray to the Lord. And I will also pray that you get the teacher you need.
Swamiji, the next question is, recommend us some books to gain more understanding about Upanishads and the Vedanta.
Okay. Strictly speaking, okay, in this I am 100% traditional. Books will not deliver the goods to you. Books will not deliver the goods. You have to find live teaching. Live teaching you have to find. I'm sorry if I'm disappointing you. Even live recordings will not help you so much, but they are better than reading a book. They are better than reading a book. Therefore, look for a traditional teacher's recording. I'm sure Advaita Academy has a lot of traditional teachers presented. Okay. So look for the recordings and hear them. Okay. I have not yet, I think I have put one recording of mine in Advaita Academy, that Chandogya Upanishad or something? Or
no, it's the Dakshinamurti Stotram.
Right now, Dakshinamurti Stotram. Yeah, I just completed that. Yeah. So Upanishad I have not yet recorded and done. So as and when I do, maybe if you can accept me as one of the traditional guys, okay. I mean, I have to put all the things in place. I can't claim anything. I don't. Okay. So with all that, I would sincerely hope you can read books. Okay. but they will give you only a general knowledge. They won't give you insights. And they may give you some wrong understandings also. Okay. Like I would say, oh, Ramakrishna Mission, eight Upanishads, all the Upanishads, the translations are there. But it won't make sense to you. You can read them. There are translations of Upanishads available. You can read them and you can gain some general knowledge. But take it as general knowledge. Don't say that you have studied the Upanishads at the end of it. Okay? So Ramakrishna Mission publications, they are fairly authentic. Gita Press Gorakhpur, the most authentic books you will get is from them. They will hand correct every mistake that is there in a book. If they are discovering it after publication, they'll hand correct everything. So you can read for a general knowledge, but that will not give you the full knowledge.
Viewers, for your benefit, I'm just adding that
Yeah.
Advaita Academy has around thousands of videos on various Upanishads, various Prakarana Granthas, and Ramayana, Mahabharata, and all these texts. So by various teachers. So you can just check our website and our YouTube channel and begin somewhere. The important thing is to make a beginning rather than thinking what should I choose, what should I not choose. And Indic Academy has also published some books on Vedanta, some general books giving a general introduction by Acharya Sadananda ji and some few others as well. You can check that out as well.
That's good work, Ritin. That's really good work. And I think that's a good idea. Make a start from there and then see where it goes. Maybe you'll get enough knowledge to find a guru.
Yes. Thank you, Swamiji. We have few more questions. I think
Yeah.
we are getting more and more questions as we discuss.
It can be endless. Yes.
Yeah, we still have time, around 20
Yeah,
minutes.
we have about 20
Yeah.
minutes. 15, 20 minutes we have. Yeah. Before I
Yeah.
start my
So-
next class.
So the next question is, a few times you mentioned about relationship issues. So such issues are vyavaharik and just have to be dealt with, or and they are not connected to dharma or anything like that, is the question.
Of course, there's always dharma coming in any action that you do. There is a dharmic component, and dharma is not subjective. It is not cultural. It is not regional. Dharma is universal. Like honesty, it's universal principle, but has to be applied in a relative situation. Therefore, dharma is always there, and a relationship issue will have a vyavaharik, a functional component. It will also have a subjective component. It is a subjective component that is creating the problem. Therefore, deal with that subjectivity on both sides. You may require help in the form of a teacher, in the form of an uncle or an aunt, or in the form of a counselor, someone's, or by yourself if you can have the objectivity to sit down and discuss and listen to each other and their subjectivities. Instead of blaming, hey, that is your subjective thing. No, forget the blame game. Try to be understanding. Then most relationship issues can be worked out.
Swamiji, the next question is, can Arjita karma effect be diluted by certain actions in this Janma?
What do you mean Arjita karma? Karma that you have brought from your previous lifetimes.
I think so.
I think that's what he means. Okay. Yes, there's always something known as prayaschitta. If I have done something problematic in the past and that is manifesting, how will you know that? You'll know it because you'll have problems in life, number one. But then everyone has problems. Okay. Number two, your horoscope will tell you that. That is if you believe in horoscope. Okay. It's part of the way, it's a Vedanga, therefore I accept it. Your horoscope will tell you what type of karma it is creating a problem and what is the parihara possible. 100% it won't remove. Some you may have to go through, there is no choice about it, nothing can be done about it. Maximum you can remove is about 70-80%, which itself is a big thing, which is 20-30% you have to go through. Sometimes 100% you have to go through, there is no choice what to do. But I have also taken people to witness and some sort of pariharas are possible. But you'll have to look into your chart, first find a good astrologer, look into your chart and then do it. Yeah.
Swamiji, the next question, I am not sure what he wants to ask. He says, consciousness and existence is a relative term. How it forms as super consciousness, and then what is Atma? I'm really not sure.
I know what is super consciousness. The consciousness by which you are aware of this idea of super consciousness is what I'm talking about. You have an idea of some super consciousness somewhere. That idea, are you aware of? The consciousness that is aware of that idea is what I'm talking about. And that consciousness is also existence, one and the same. They are not relative concepts. I'm talking about the consciousness by which you are aware of everything, including your concepts of super consciousness. You don't have to use the word super consciousness. The word consciousness is enough. Otherwise, you are creating a lot of words, and because of these words, you're creating, you think there are entities like that, and then you will be in a royal mess. Please listen to all that I've said again. The videos will be available.
Swamiji, the next question is, what causes the creation of an individual mind, and post moksha, what happens to the mind?
Okay. Your individual mind is a creation of Ishvara's order. Okay. It goes with the existence, consciousness, etc. All that. You can use the Panchabhuta model to understand that. Read Tattva Bodha. That's a simple book. You will understand that part of it. That much book you can understand. What happens after death? After the death of a wise person, okay, of a wise person, of a realized soul, the mind is resolved back into the consciousness from where it came, and you remain as pure consciousness, the basis for everything. Whereas for ordinary people, that mind goes into another body, etc., rebirth, etc. For a wise person, that is not there. You remain a simple consciousness. Yeah, Nitin.
Swamiji, the next question is, can you suggest any small booklet or something which has the definitions of these terms, awareness, consciousness, Brahman, Satchidanandam, Anantam, etc.?
Yes. Read Tattva Bodha. That's a simple book that can be read. You will get conceptual understanding. If you read by yourself, you will only get a conceptual understanding. You won't understand the non-conceptual reality. But understanding of this terminology will be there. So at least standpoints, etc., will be clear for you. Though it will be still conceptual, but at least some awareness will come. Read Tattva Bodha.
The next question is, how not to judge people for what their thoughts and behaviors are?
Simple. How not to judge people? Stop judging. Stop taking a morally or a personally superior position. As I said, even if you are a wise person, that wisdom should lie lightly on your shoulders. I am struggling with my mind. Others are struggling with their mind. Therefore, we are all in the same boat. No, but I am a wise person. The other guy is a potentially wise person. He is what you were before you discovered wisdom. Therefore, you will have a compassionate understanding. You can evaluate people. Naturally, you have to evaluate people to deal with them, but stop being judgmental. Sitting in a morally superior position and saying, this guy is an idiot. No, don't do that. That's all. Otherwise, it's fine.
The next question is there an age to study Vedanta? How can we teach the wisdom of the Upanishads to small kids at school?
Don't teach Vedanta in schools. Make them understand what Ishvara is. Abhinna Nimitta Upadana Karanam. That much is important. Introduce them to certain ideas. Like I do this, not for small kids. For small kids, there are a couple of programs that I have seen. There may be others also, but I have not seen that. One program is the Chinmaya Mission Balvihar program, is quite good. The other program is called Purna Vidya. It is run by a junior colleague of mine, Pramananda, from Coimbatore. So these programs are good for teaching children basic ideas. Don't try to teach the whole Vedanta, Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, etc. They are not ready for it. It has to happen after Pariksha Lokan has happened. Yeah. At least you have to be 17, 18 before you start studying Vedanta. Okay. That's how I started. Not that it made great sense at 16, 17. It did not make great sense. But at least I met my teacher and I was impressed by him and I understood Ishvara. That's all I understood in the beginning. But that is enough for me to deal with my life. Therefore, what you need to deal with children is teach them the ideas of proactivity, of being creative, of being responsible, of managing their own emotions, about being objective in life, about taking charge of their lives. These are the things you teach. Teach them about relationships, because they all are getting into relationship by the time they are in high school. By the time they are in 10th, 11th, 12th, they're all getting into relationship. Teach them about that. Don't lecture them. Do it in a workshop format. Call somebody who can do it in a workshop format. Don't be moralistic with youngsters. Like when I used to do a sex education workshop with youngsters. And I used to ask them, when do you think you're ready for sex? Now I want to put value based there. But I don't lecture on morality. Believe me, the teenagers will not look at you after that. When are you ready for sex? They'll look at each other and try to give me the right answer. Sir, after marriage. You're waiting for a certificate from the government to have sex? Then they look at each other. They find, yaar, this sadhu thoda khatarnak hai. They will think with each other. This sadhu is different, okay? Then we have a discussion. What is sex? When are you ready for it? How sacred it is? All that. We educate. We don't lecture or advise. If you do it this way, youngsters will not fail you if we don't fail them. Youngsters are the future of our country. They will not fail you if you do not fail them. Yeah, that's how you deal with it.
Swamiji, the next question is, how to know whether we are making any progress in our spiritual quest?
Where is the progress anyway? It's from you to yourself. So how clear is your understanding about yourself? How clear is the fact that you are consciousness? How well you are being able to manage your emotions? What is your level of maturity? All this will help. All this will help.
We have few more questions, and I think we should
Yeah,
take
couple
it.
of questions we can have. Yes.
Yeah, quickly. One is Atma the Karana Sharira? If not, why not?
Karna Sharira is your ignorance, which you are aware of in deep sleep also. Your ignorance you're aware of. Your subconscious mind, you know there is something like that much you're aware of. Okay. In deep sleep, you are aware of the fact that you knew nothing. That's why you can get up in the morning and say, I slept well. So the Karna Sharira is an object of your awareness, and you are the awareness, the consciousness which objectifies it. So the Atma cannot be the Karna Sharira. The very word Sharira means it's a unit from which to express itself, not you.
The next question is, would it be helpful to see consciousness as having different levels like Jiva, Atma, Brahma, like we talk about Pratibhashika, Vyavaharika, Paramarthika, etc.?
Pratibhasika, Vyavaharika, etc. are not degrees of consciousness. They are degrees of Mithya. Pratibhasika and Vyavaharika are degrees of Mithya. Paramarthika is what the real consciousness is about. Consciousness does not have degrees. Manifestation can have degrees. The manifested world can have degrees. One is the subjective reality, one is the objective reality. There are degrees. Vyavaharikam, Pratibhasikam. But consciousness does not have any degrees. Consciousness is consciousness. Limitless, timeless. What is timeless and spaceless cannot have degrees.
Swamiji, I think this is a important question. How to control lustful thoughts and lust manifested in our consciousness with the help of Vedanta?
Welcome to the world. Welcome to the human race. All human people are sexual human beings. Accept your sexuality. Do not fight it. Very, very important. In fact, when people come and ask me, Swamiji, I want to be a monk like you. I also want to become sannyasi and full time into Vedanta. First question I ask them is, have you ever fallen in love? No, Swamiji, never. Then you're not ready. Then you're not ready. Go fall in love. You survive that, come back. I'm not joking. I'm saying it in a jovial manner. That's all. It's a truth. Why? Because if you have not accepted your sexuality, you're denying it and it'll create problems for you. Like you have stories of some sadhus misbehaving, etc. That's all because they denied their sexuality. Accept your sexuality, deal with it. Decide how much you need. If you're a highly sexual being, get married. Live a life of karma yoga, get married, have a good, proper physical relationship. Enjoy the process with Ishwararpana Buddhi, Prasada Buddhi, so that at the end of the day, you can say, I've been there, done that. My mind is ready to move on. Then you can say that that sexual pressure you're getting is also nothing but the manifestation of the ananda that you are. Isn't it true? The ananda that you are is manifesting through a sexual experience. When you recognize that, the more continue, that means what? You continue your studies along with your relationship. Your relationship is happening on one level, your studies are also happening. And time will come when you will find that sex is always a pleasure. From 8 to 80, it can be a pleasure. Is no more a need for you. When it is no more a need for you, you are ready for sannyasa, etc. Not otherwise. Even though you start with sex as a biological need, as a biological urge, when you give in to that urge and deal with it nicely, within the framework of dharma, when you deal with it, you find that you can grow, and a time will come, along with the studies, not without the studies, it won't happen. Along with the studies of Vedanta, you will find that a time will come when you can say, it is no more a need. It's a pleasure, all right. The Tattvabodha mentions the function of the genitals as pleasure, not as excretion. Yeah. Therefore, when you do it like this, you'll find you're fine. Then there are some yoga asanas and some breathing practices also, because of which you can do it. But the thing is, get in touch with the ananda that you are. That's what will help you. And as your sexual urge is also a part of the creative expression in you. So if you're involved in creative activities, you'll find the sexual desire is lower. Everything is not, Vedanta is not a solution for everything, okay? Things have to be handled differently. Vedanta is a solution for your sense of finitude.
Swamiji, we will take one last question.
Yeah.
Can prema in its true sense be considered along with ananda for a cordial existence in the world?
Of course. It's always good to be loving and compassionate. That's what you mean by prema, isn't it? Love and compassion. That's always necessary. Even without Vedanta, love and compassion is necessary in the world. No? Whether you are a Vedantin or not, to have a loving, compassionate approach to people is a good thing to have. If you are a Vedantin, it's easier to have. Why? The more you discover your Ananda, Ananda in a relationship is nothing but love. Unconditional love, non-demanding love. Just an expression of your care, etc. So that's very natural, spontaneous for a Vedanta. If you have, the more you understand Vedanta, you'll become loving and compassionate. You'll care for people. You'll not become moralistic and judgmental. After studying Vedanta, if you are becoming moralistic and judgmental, Vedanta is not working for you. You are taking a superior position where Vedanta is saying there's only oneness.
Swamiji, just one more question. This is in the chat. Our philosophy says the soul after death, I think he means jiva after death, either takes a rebirth or attains moksha. We also have a concept of heaven and hell, swarga, narka. How does one reconcile the two?
Swarga, narka is nothing but the manifestation at the physical realm. There are 14 dimensions of existence. Science speaks about between 9 and 11. we talk about 14 dimensions of existence. Sarga and Narka are covered in that. So the Jiva, if he doesn't understand what you call soul, the Jiva, if he doesn't understand the truth, he doesn't gain moksha. What the moksha your priest will talk about is going to another dimension, having a break from the problems of earth. You go to have this, go have a nice break there and come back again in another body to pick up the thread. The journey of a jiva is towards moksha. So until he gains moksha, this up and down will keep on happening. He'll go to Aloka, come back here, go to Aloka, come back here. The priest will call it moksha only to indicate he has moved on from this earth and he is in another dimension. That's all it means when the priest tells you moksha. That's apekshikam, a limited perspective of it. Okay, not real moksha. Moksha is freedom from birth and death. So that will come only with knowing yourself. So Nitin, good place to stop?
Yes, Swamiji. Yeah.
Another class after this. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Swamiji, for this 2 days of enlightening lecture. It was very enlightening, very fascinating to me personally. And I am sure with the kind of questions we had, I am sure the viewers have a lot of food for thought, and they extremely enjoyed it. And hopefully in future we will do a more elaborate e-camp or e-retreat kind of thing for a more number of days rather than just 2 sessions.
Yeah.
And thank you again for coming on this program, Swamiji.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with all of you. Good audience. I'm happy to be here. And some of them were asking for my numbers and things like that. You are welcome to share it with them if you feel it is appropriate.
Yeah, please write to the Advaita Academy and we will share the details there. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. With this, we come to a conclusion of yet another Weekend with Wisdom session. And we will soon announce our latest programs on our Facebook page and our Twitter account. Please follow us on both places and check out our videos and lectures on our YouTube channel and our website. Thank you. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.